I've always wanted a dragon, but since no one has found one yet, and surgically altering our dog to look like one is not feasible, we decided to build an animatronic one. Well, at least the head of one. To start, we found a decent looking dragon mask on Amazon and designed everything around this. We started constructing the skeleton out of wood as it's cheap, easy to work with, and gives us a good idea if the design is functional. Focusing on the skull for the mask to go over first, we roughed out a jawbone as well as a skull plate to help hold the mask open.
If I can get it in, come on, and then that'll hold the dragon's head.
The jaw piece was slotted and the skull piece was glued in place. His singular neck bone would articulate at the base of the skull and the base of the neck. With that sorted, it was time to put everything together with some hinges and see it actually wiggling. Using some 3D printed brackets, we mounted the servo to the neck and hammered in a small brass tube into the back corner of the skull for the wire linkage to sit and pivot in, utilizing a straightened paper clip for the linkage. A similar procedure was done for the joint at the base of the neck, utilizing 3D printed brackets and a straightened paper clip once again. And look at that, it's working! Well, sort of. The paperclip wire is not strong enough and just buckles under compression. This was enough to prove the concept functional though, and we could now build a more final version out of a lighter material, which we ended up using acrylic as it's nice and easy to work with, and a lot lighter than a section of 2x4. It's not a dragon if it doesn't breathe fire, so we designed a flamethrower that will be mounted to the jaw. This flamethrower uses butane cylinders and a servo to release the gas. And for the ignition, we are using one of these cheap DC high voltage generators. While it's not 400,000 volts like the Amazon listing says, it does throw a decent enough spark for what we want here. Plus it's nice and compact, which makes it easy to mount directly to the flamethrower assembly.
Make sure you're always wearing appropriate PPE.
Squint if you don't have glasses.
With the new jaw cut out of acrylic, the flamethrower was screwed onto it. Next was designing a center ridge for the skull. This helped hold the mask open, but also added additional support for the skull plate. The ridge plate and skull plate were both slotted so they would slide together, and then everything was held down and glued in place, with the addition of a couple of reinforcement blocks in the corners where the three pieces meet. The neck bone and skull are drilled out to mount the hinges, as well as 3D printed pivot points, one on the neck and one on the skull. This worked great until the rear hinge started sagging too much, put too much strain on the servo, and we learned the product description for the servos lied about them having a full metal gearbox. After a servo swap, finding a stronger hinge, and redesigning the neck linkage to reduce the forces on the servo, it was working great. For controlling all the servos and other electronics, we developed a PCB that everything connects up to. As an added note, all the schematics and code will be on our Hackaday project post, linked in the description. The Arduino Nano is the brains of this whole project. The code it's running begins by moving the head and neck randomly from side to side. First, the head moves, and then the neck follows, just like a real serpent. The movement has to be slow and smooth. A timed movement function was added for these servos, which gives it a much more realistic motion. For some cool effects, we added a small MP3 player that can play dragon sounds from an SD card through a small speaker, which we hot glued to the skull. These DF mini players are great for this, and no amplifiers are needed either. Every now and then, the MP3 player is activated to randomly play one of the 5 sound effects. Because this is a separate module, the sound can play while the head is also moving. Then occasionally, we want it to breathe fire. To do this, we activate the high voltage spark via a MOSFET that the Arduino turns on. Immediately after this, the servo presses against the gas canister and squirts gas into the spark, igniting it, and the sequence repeats. With the electronics board completed, we attach it to the base plate, which will be inside of the dragon's neck. Next was to hide this animatronic skeleton inside of an integumentary system, also known as skin. For the neck skin, we found this faux red and black alligator skin fabric, which looks just like real dragon skin. However, the colors didn't match the mask perfectly, so the cat and I found some paint that matched decently and dry brushed the mask so it would blend better. After this, we marked and cut out the skin roughly where it would fit, and used our old friend hot glue to hold the skin to the mask. With that in place, we could slide the skin and mask onto the skeleton and start shaping the skin and trimming excess to fit properly. And since this would be mounted to a wall, we opted to hide the seam along the top edge. once again using hot glue to close the seam and essentially turning the whole head and neck into a strange sock.
You know, we haven't given him a name.
Harold.
This would be pinned to the baseboard using some pre-drilled holes and some nails that we painted black. And with that all done, it's now time to turn it on and see it in all its glory. Now that the build is complete, we can put our dragon to the test, scorching the earth.
Oh! Oh, that smells like burning glue and polyester.
What about terrorizing some villagers?
Ooh, those are toasty villagers.
We can even use Harold to roast marshmallows.